Our next speaker resides in nearby Mount Prospect. He likes to regard himself as an industrial historian with specific interests in popular culture. That's where pinball comes from. Dick is both a pinball collector as well as an author, and is now working on the 10-volume history of pinball for the Coin Slot books, with the first volume expected this coming spring. It is out of his research for these books, as well as his private paperwork on pinball machines, his patent information, as well as photographs and industrial history collection, that brings his presentation of early pinball history to Pinball Expo '85. He grew up in the west side of Chicago in the 30s and 40s, served in the 9th Air Force in the World War II. He's been a model airplane designer, mechanical design draftsman, advertising copywriter, and is now an account executive in a major Chicago area industrial advertising agency. His books include Communist Chinese Air Power, published by Prager, and is used by the Air Force Academy as a textbook. He's also a consultant to the American Heritage, the Smithsonian Institute, 20th Century Fox Films, and is the historical editor of the Coin Slot magazine. He's married, has 2 daughters, and is here to talk about his favorite subject, pinball. Dick Bueschel.
Thank you, Rob. Ladies, gentlemen, and our very esteemed guests, it's a delight to be here. That rundown that he gave you there, yes, I did all those things. You know what? I'm still broke. Pinball is my favorite subject, and I've been poking away at pinball history for, I say, since 1968. I find it the richest broth of human beings, graphic arts, and popular culture I have ever found. I hope today that we can show you some things that you never saw before, and that's for all of you as collectors, any of you enthusiasts as historians, and also those of you in the industry. And I hope today that we can all learn something we didn't know before. Pinball history starts with a game that really wasn't pinball. Started in the middle 18th century. I was glad that Ed Trapunski, who I think wrote a very cerebral and fine book, and if he's got some for sale in the other room, I think he does, grab it. It's going to be a collector's item. Ed mentioned the game of bagatelle. Well, let me show you a game of bagatelle. It's quite simple. It has a slanted playfield. This is on an angle. And inside, it has a shooter. Now, very early in the game, it was just a stick and a clay ball, but then you have a shooter. A ball goes up, and this is the important part. There is a curvature at the top that returns the ball to play. You now have an inclined plane, and gravity is going to bring that ball down. So what you've done is you've somehow placed a ball with a certain degree of skill at a certain rate of speed at the top of a playfield, and it is now going to drop down that playfield. The speed depends on the angle of that inclined plane. Game goes back to, I'd say the 1750s, came out of France, became the game of the French court. The French soldiers who came to this country to help in the American Revolution brought the game with them. They gave us bagatelle, and we gave them a revolution. Because as those French soldiers went back to France on their boat, they were given copies of the Declaration of Independence. They read it. They had nothing to do for 2 weeks, and they said, holy smoke, look at the way these people live. It was a good trade. All right, what happened after that with the game of bagatelle? When they tore a fort apart at Prairie du Chien on the Mississippi River, which had been a French fort, buried between the walls was a bagatelle game. So some French soldiers didn't want to get caught by the boss, and they hid it in the wall, and it was discovered in 1938. The principle of the game is the same today as it was then. After that, it came to America, and we know from the pinball books what happened. Ed Trapunski made a very fine point. Pinball is always advanced technology. The latest development, thank you, the latest development in technology is first expressed in an amusement. And the most viable amusement that can be used in is pinball. The man was Montague Redgrave. He lived in America's fastest growing city. It was going to be the second largest city in this country because of its industrial growth, and the name of the city is Cincinnati. The Mesabi Range had not yet been discovered. The Great Lakes cities were not yet built. And Cincinnati was going to be it. So Redgrave was there. And what he did, he took the bagatelle game and said, I am going to make this game so different, it will never be the same again. And what he added was the steel spring. We went through the Civil War without the steel spring. We did not have the technology to make the steel, to draw the steel, and we did not have the invention of the rolling devices that created the spring. If you think about things that run by springs, it's absolutely amazing. How did we get through the Civil War without it? But when he put the spring in the bagatelle game, we had the Montague Redgrave bagatelle. And I think if you look in some of the pinball history books and things, you'll see mention of Montague Redgrave. What happened after that? That's some of the things I want to show you today. Because, and if we could center the slide, please. Because after that monumental event, lights down, is it too, can you get, what should we do? We knock out center lights. How are we doing? A little more light out? I don't know about you guys, but if the room is dark, I fall asleep. How's that doing? And how's our centering doing? All right. Now I want to talk about the real history of pinball. And I'm calling this Pinball, the revolutionary new game idea that was invented 7 times. Okay. Our first back was Montague Redgrave in 1871. But everything boomed so fast, he said, I can't handle this here. And so in 1872, he moved to Jersey City, New Jersey, and formed the M. Redgrave Bagatelle Company. Now what happened was there was an explosion in bagatelle usage because the game was so clever. What I'm showing you now is a patent from a James Elson. The name of the game is Tivoli, and the patent is 1875. Now Elson got his patent out. He lived in Jersey City. Montague Redgrave had created such an exciting thing, and the game drive had been so great, that with a period of about 5 or 6 or 7 years, he had 7 or 8 inventors all living in the area creating different versions of the bagatelle game. If you look at the lower right-hand corner of the main playfield, you'll see an entirely different spring structure. That's a leaf spring. There was a great big patent war going on between competitive bagatelle producers in ways to shoot that ball up that playfield. Okay? What happened after that? Where did the game go? Here comes a mind bender. This is the Parisian bagatelle table. Now, what's the difference between this and a pinball game? First of all, I'd like you to take a look at the copy, Parisian bagatelle table, and the size of that game. This game was made in 1889 by the Montague Redgrave Bagatelle Company. It is a saloon piece. It is a saloon gambling piece. And what you've got here is exactly the same thing we have in this small bagatelle. A shooter, an inclined plane, and pockets. What would make that a pinball? There were only 2 things missing. One is a covered glass to provide security for the ball, so you can't manipulate the ball after it's been shot. 2 is a coin process. The invention of pinball, it was not the invention of a game. The invention of pinball was a way to make money with an existing game. And there's a fundamental point there. How do you make money with existing games? This is what coin machines looked like in 1889. The gambling machines hadn't come yet. The big thing in the center, tall vertical thing, is a Clausen musical scale. It was made in Newark, New Jersey, 1887, 88, and 89. Incidentally, none have ever been found. To the right of it is a hand grip tester. That's a saloon piece. That's a coin up. You run a dial up. And typically, these are the kinds of things. But they brought something new to American society and popular culture. You could go into the poor man's club, that's a saloon, and you could entertain yourself with a coin. So how are we going to make money with bagatelles? Let's take a look at that bagatelle again. The size is right. There are people there who would pay money to play that game. And the location is perfect. It's a saloon. It's where men congregate, and they're going to drop some money. While all that was going on, the first pinball game was invented. This was done by Charles P. Young of York, Pennsylvania, and the year is 1892. Charlie Young had a billiard parlor and cigar store in York, Pennsylvania, right around the main square. And I think Stanley Harris, have you all met Stan Harris over there? I told you I'd do this to you. Is York still a town with a town square? It's not too far away, okay. He had this billiard hall and he had this pool parlor, and he said, I want to make some money on these things. The man was an inventive genius, and if you go through the patent art, he invented an automatic payout slot machine, he invented a roulette machine that was a coin-operated, all sorts of trade stimulators, and this marvelous, marvelous invention, the first viable pinball game. You put a coin down there, you got a shooter in the middle, but I got to tell you, it's a fast game. Take a look at the angle of that playfield. There's another patent that follows this, that right after, where the box is set considerably higher, another 4 or 5 inches higher, and which vends cigars, so that there was a little legal trouble, and they said, hey, you're stealing money from people. You got to give them a chance to win something, so you put your coin in, you played your game, you got a cigar, and if the score was right, you got more. While that great invention was going on, and that's the first time pinball was invented, it didn't stick. What you're looking at here is a men's club in the Berkshire Mountains. Because the game of bagatelle was now a boomer, and if you look at the far right-hand side, you'll see something which is called a French bagatelle. They were imported from France, and they were also made in this country. Now, the interesting thing there is that there is a chalkboard behind it and a chalk. People played these. They got used to these big games, and they would mark up the score, and that would be a very competitive kind of a thing. All right? So the Americans jumped in. This is the Montague Redgrave patent of 1898 with an integral shooter. This is still a bagatelle. It is not coin-operated. But if you look at the lower right-hand corner again, the shooter is an integral thing, and a little knob sticks up on the top. There are game principles in some of these bagatelles that have never been used in actual pinball, and I just got to think they're going to be dynamite. What happened next? The Americans jumped in. This is the B.A. Stevens Company, which was a saloon equipment supplier in Toledo, Ohio. The year now is about 1899. We don't have a coin op here yet, but this is a game called Tivoli. You remember the Tivoli bagatelle of many years back. We have now changed the game. This is a two-shooter game. You have a cue stick, you're shooting billiard balls, you've got the inclined plane, you've got the pins, you've got the sockets, you've got the holes, but here we've got something interesting, because now you have a drop, and the scoring is through a hole, and the balls are collected at the bottom. No coin op yet. Depending on what part of the country this game was played or used in, it was called the Tivoli in the Middle West, it was called the Manhattan in the East, and had other names, 3 or 4 other names that were used in the far, far West. Okay? It was about this time that the English came up with their first pinball game. None has ever been found. The producer was Hayden and Urey, one of the very English pioneers in coin-operated machines, and they made a game, a coin-op game, called Bagatelle in 1897. English collectors, there are many, and you've seen this wonderful publication that our friends from the UK are showing off today. English collectors found the patent for that game no longer than 4 or 5 months ago. None of the games have ever been found. We talk about whether these are antiques or not, but you can get an idea what would the value be of the first Charles P. Young, York, Pennsylvania pinball game. I don't want to estimate it. What would the value be of a Hayden and Early Bagatelle from 1897? If you ever saw one, bring money, because they're going to be valuable. Okay, we now have a game that the Americans are playing. We now have an American pinball game, and we now have the second invention of pinball, which is the Hayden and Early pinball game. Now we're going to go into something else. Once again, back to the British. This is the Pickwick. This is sold by Gamages. This is the year is 1900. A man named Herbert Pessers invented the game. He first developed the principle for the game. It is a vertical pinball game. Oh, his year was about 1894, 1895. He had not yet had a coin process on it. But here we have Picnic with a coin process. And now this was the most popular game in England right at the turn of the century. They kept going with it. This is the improved Pickwick, about in 1904. There was an auction in California last year that did have a Pickwick. These are quite valuable machines in the UK, and I've only seen 1 or 2 in this country. All right. What was the first really commercial pinball? The one that was really sold? I want to give you a mind bender. This is the Paul Burger Manufacturing Company automatic flag table. If you're looking at the lower left, you're looking at a large one, and if you're looking at the on the right side, you're looking at a smaller one. When we say automatic flag table, it was a nickel play machine. It shot billiard balls, and depending on what hole they went into, it threw a flag at the end. That kind of scoring didn't appear in American pinball games until 1933, and here it is in 1903. Once again, this game has never been found, and I can't even imagine what the value would be. The Burger Manufacturing Company was in Chicago Ridge, Illinois, and I say was because the name has changed, but the factory is still there. Not all of it, of course. Most of it burned down in a fire about 1907, and I talked to a lady who bought the house that Paul E. Burger lived in with a pink marble fireplace, and she said, when we were children, we used to play in the ruins of the building, but not in the other two because they were still there. If you look over at the far right side, you'll see a long, narrow building. That building is still there. I was down there last year. It's kitty corner across the street from the old railroad station. The railroad used to be the Wabash and is now owned by Fluid Power. So in my own inimitable style, I conned my way in there to see the general manager of Fluid Power and said, I'd like to talk to you about this building. I'd like to have a tour of the building. He said, why? I said, because this is where they first made viable pinball games. Well, he threw me out. He said, we would never have anything to do with a business like that. But the building is still there. That gives Chicago the viable base for really creating the first operating and saleable pinball game. Those catalog pages I showed you a moment ago are from the Albert Pick catalog of 1903. The game was cataloged for about 3 years. There's also a Ripley J. White catalog, which also has that game, which I will reproduce in my volume 1 of the series that Rob told you about. Okay. After that, what happened? I'm going to show you the oldest known photograph of a pinball game on location. What you're looking at is the interior of the El Dorado Saloon in Sacramento, California in 1902. And if you look, I don't know if you can see it on this slide. Let me take a look. See that? That's a pinball game. It's called Log Cabin. Now, what did the game look like? Very, very interesting game. Now, pinball is a very viable and hot thing, and literally here we have the fourth invention of pinball. You know what? This one didn't take either. This lasted about 5 or 6 or 7 years. It was made in 2 versions. The early version, 1902, was made by Cayley Schemer Company, later Cayley Brothers Company, and it's called the Square Top. I know of one to exist. Following it, about 1904, they came out with one which is called the Round Top, and I believe it's Alan Gottlieb's example, but he has one in our exhibit hall here. Do not fail to take a look at that. That is the fourth invention of pinball. It's a nickel play machine, but in effect it's a trade stimulator. It's almost a gambling machine because if you get the right colored balls in the right pockets, the bartender, realize, saloons were the placement. The bartender paid you off in free drinks or other things. Okay? After that came the fifth invention of pinball. And the inventor was a gentleman named George H. Miner. Now, George Miner, I've never been able to find the game. I've never been able to find a picture of the game. George Miner lived in Los Angeles, California. And he also had a company in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he created a game called Baseball. It was a bagatelle type of game with a lot of holes and a lot of pockets, had a glass cover and a coin process on it. When the pinball patent wars took place in 1933 and 1934, with all of the major companies competing against each other and suing the daylights out of each other for ball processes and for coin processes, ball lifts and everything else, Bally went after every patent they could get. The Mills Novelty Company went after every patent they could get, and others did the same. Bally ended up with the patent for the George Miner baseball game, and they put that patent number, a 1928 patent number, on all their games until about 1935 or 36. So if you look at your old literature and if you look at some of the games, you'll see that patent number, George H. Miner. They even hired George Miner, and he was killed in an airplane crash in 1935. He was one of the geniuses of the coin machine business, and certainly one of the great geniuses of pinball. Okay, invention number 6 was a guy in New York named Sam Kressberg. Now, Sam Kressberg had tried all sorts of wonderful things, and he mostly was working in music, and he had a company called the Capitol Automatic Music Company. In 1928, he went to Canada, And when he was in Canada, he saw an enormous bagatelle game, and he said, holy malooney, if I put a coin chute on this thing and put glass on top, I'm going to have a game like you never saw before. Sam Kressberg made 100 of these bagatelle games, never sold them, put them on location in New York City, made a fortune on them for about 6 months, and then they died. Apparently he threw them all out. None of the games have survived. That was the first time pinball really made any money, and that was invention number 6. Okay? After that, then these 3 guys came along. You're looking at the man at the far left. His name is Merle A. Park. He had a radio shop. And the guy in the middle is named Earl Froome. He was an electrician and kind of a clever guy. And the guy to the far right is Arthur Palin. The year was 1930, and the country is in deep depression and gloom. Nothing was going to work. Nobody had any jobs. So Art Palin went to the barn and he hauled out a bagatelle. He said, Jesse, this thing's about 40 or 50 years old. And he was going to give it to his son for Christmas. But he said, well, I can't give him this whole thing. I'm going to make a new one. He made it about twice the size. He ran into Earl Froome and he ran into Merle Park in the local drugstore. And he said, look what I got here, guys. And they played it. He said, my kids love it. Froome said, you know what? We have an invention here. We have an invention that the world has never seen. It's the most exciting thing I've ever seen. If we put a coin slot on this thing, we're going to make a fortune with it. And they created a game called Wiffle. This is the prototype of Wiffle. And believe it or not, we have a Wiffle in our exhibit hall. I haven't seen one for years. It's in the Orange Trading Company booth. This old prototype was called Old Jenny. And they got a patent on Wiffle. And for the first year of pinball, it wasn't called pinball at all. It wasn't even called marble games. It was called Wiffle. They had Wiffle competitions in Canada. They had Wiffle competitions in this country. The people made a fortune. In 1931, at the Coin Machine Show, there was nobody exhibiting a pinball game. In 1932, there were over 40 exhibitors of pinball games, 22 of them from Youngstown, Ohio, because everybody in town copied this guy. If you look at that Coin Machine Show across the street over at the O'Hare Expo, there are 3 different Youngstown games over there. You can precisely date them. They're between June and December of 1931. Okay. What you're looking at here is the first factory dedicated to the manufacturing the pinball game. It's called the Automatic Industries, and it's on 51 South 1st Street. The date is April 1931. Realize now, you're in the height of the Depression. You're in real trouble here, and this game wasn't sold, it was leased. Well, they did pretty well with it, and they made a lot of money. They made so much money that a guy named Nathan Robin on the north side of Chicago, and had a partner named Leo Berman, said, hey, you know, they're leasing this thing, or they're selling it for $300 or $400. I bet we can make something for less than 20 bucks. So in their basement, they created a game called Bingo. He got a patent on Bingo, and if you look at the Elston patent of the 1870s, and if you look at the York patent, the Charles, I got to get him right, Charlie Young. If you look at the Young patent, if you look at all the other patents, it's the same game. But there's something here that is different. He's added all the other things. There's a coin drop here. In other words, when you put the coin process in, they had something like a window latch on it. You move the board, the balls drop down, and then you had a terrible ramp to get up. You had to rise about 4.5 inches to get this thing up the ramp. You've seen these games, Bingo, Planet, Comet, some of the others. He sold it for $12.95. Berman took about a dozen of them, put them in the trunk of his car, and headed for New York. Robin headed for St. Louis, and they came back. He wasn't millionaires, but the equivalent of being a millionaire, because by December of 1931, these guys were buying a factory. What happened after that? Then came one. It says, wait no longer. Here it is. It's the game we all know and love. It's called Baffle Ball. Baffle Ball was a recreation of another of some of the other Bagatelle patents, including the artwork and all the framing. It was made by D. Gottlieb and Company. He didn't know it, but he soon knew that he had a very good thing. Production was jobbed out to about 3 or 4 other shops around Chicago. It was Keeney made some, and some of the other people made some. They couldn't keep up. Baffle Ball is rated at selling at about 65,000 pieces. Now, if you look at the pinball production of today, you're talking 3,000 to 5,000 pieces per game. Imagine that. 65,000 of these games. In the height of the Depression, selling for about 12 or 14 bucks. D. Gottlieb and Company had their own building by March of 1932. Then there was another guy who came along, a really fantastic Irishman, probably rated as one of the greatest promoters of the business, and his name was Ray Maloney. Maloney had been selling printing, and actually he sold punch boards. He worked with two other guys. They had a printing press. And Maloney said, oh, you know, this coin machine business is kind of nifty. So he's opened up something called the Midwest Novelty Supply Company. And he was a jobber. He jobbed Watling slot machines, and he jobbed a hip flask. Remember now, this is during Prohibition. And he also was jobbing baffle ball. Sent an order in, didn't get any delivery. Sent another order in, started getting on the phone and saying, hey, I need some stuff here. Got no delivery because nobody could keep up with it. Maloney said, damn it, what am I going to do? He said, I'm going to make my own game. So what he did was, a Chicago craftsman and art designer named Van Tull walked in with a breadboard. It was a box board. The difference between the breadboard that he brought in was it was thinner and it was longer. And it was a little more fun to play, and it had a hole at the top. You could get a double score, whatever you did. Maloney was so taken with this thing that he put this thing under his arm. And wherever he went with this plain wooden box. People said, Ray, you're nuts. He said, no, no. He said, we're going to have this at the Coin Machine Show in '32. One day, he was running kitty corner across State Street, running from a newsstand, running across the street to Marshall Fields and Company, stopped dead cold in the center of the street. He said, you know what I saw on that newsstand? I saw the name of our game, and I saw the graphics on the game. And what he had seen was the December 1931 issue of a magazine called Ballyhoo. It was a joke magazine. Out of that came the name of the game, and out of that came the colors on the game, and out of that came the graphics of the game. It was a matter of weeks later that they had the Ballyhoo game at the Coin Machine Show in Chicago, January 1932. Realize now, height of the Depression, but something else. You're talking about World War I. The World War I veterans were barely in their early 30s. They didn't have jobs. They needed entertainment, and they wanted something which was going to give them something for their money. How about 10 balls for a penny? So what Maloney did, I think he's probably the greatest promotional genius the coin machine business ever had. He took the song they all knew, Mademoiselle from Armentières, and all the way through that coin machine show, they said, what'll you do when 32 play Ballyhoo? What'll you do when 32 play Ballyhoo? He ran away with it. He formed a company. It is the only game that named a company, that was named after a magazine. And when Ray Maloney came home that night after the show, he had $200,000 in his pocket. The run on the machine, Depression now, the run on the machine was about 68 to 70,000. And the content of the machine, he was selling it for 2.5 times the cost of the material inside the machine. Okay. That's the history of pinball. That's where pinball came from. After that, it became the Depression, and the boom was on. What you're looking at here is now the most wonderful location of all. Repeal, May 1933. It looked like good times are coming, hopefully. We didn't know. And what you're looking at here is a Genco subway in a combination saloon, drugstore, barn, everything else. It was May 1933 that repeal came in, and the pinball boom was on its way. Where did it all come from? It came from Bagatelle. And I got to make the point again. The invention of pinball was not the invention of the game. The invention of pinball was a way to make money with an existing game. Thank you. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed assembling this stuff. It's a delight to be here.
All right. Any questions, please feel free to ask them now. Just raise your hand.
I got to say, this is my office wall, incidentally. Okay. And those are Bagatelles. And I've got on the other side of the office wall, I've got a Marble Games bunny board, which is a Youngstown, Ohio game made in about September 1931. I also have what I think is the niftiest game of all, which is a Rockola World's Fair jigsaw. That's my name. Questions and answers. Go ahead. Yeah.
One of those pinball inventions, you said that none of them existed. You didn't have a picture.
Yeah.
How did you even prove that it existed? Where was your source?
Question is that I never found a picture, and the game existed, and what's my source? How do I know? Generally 3 sources for things like that. 1 of those pinball inventions, you said that none of them existed. You didn't have a picture. Yeah. How did you even prove that it existed? Question is that I never found a picture, and the game existed, and what's my source? How do I know? Generally 3 sources for things like that. You go to the trade publications, and I got to tell you about trade publications. I say pinball is popular culture, and it disappears, and only because if we weren't interested in pinball, if the people in this room weren't interested in pinball, nobody would know anything about it 10 years from today. It's an awesome responsibility, but it's true. It really is true that unless somebody is interested in something, it's going to get away. Trade publications are the carbon dating of any business or industry. If you're interested in electrical stuff, you know, get copies of Electrical World or get some of this turn-of-the-century stuff. The trade publications during the heyday of the coin machine business were Coin Machine Journal, edited by a guy named Harvey Carr from 1931 to 1962. There was one called Automatic Age, which started in August 1926 and went up to about 1955. If you track the trade journals, you will see articles, you'll see people proudly talking about what they do, and will mention machines, and will mention earlier machines. The trade journal for the business much earlier than that, turn of the century, was the National Police Gazette, combination between Playboy and a trade publication. You'll see mentions of games, okay, and you got to go with it. Advertising for games, which sometimes illustrate the games, but more often than not just describe the games. Practically everyone I mentioned had been advertised. It's said for the bar folder on the blah, blah, blah. And others are patents. Probably the greatest source for information about non-existent games is patents. Because if you had a game process or any process within that game that was patentable, believe me, they got it. And you look at some of these patent pictures and you say, holy smoke, I love that thing. Does that answer that? Okay.
Excuse me, Billboard still up.
Billboard's very good. I missed Billboard, and I should say Billboard probably, if you're into pinball collecting for any time frame at all, Billboard started, the first in and outdoor games Whoopee was advertised in Billboard in March 32. And ever since then, till about the middle 1960s, they've got marvelous pinball advertising. Yes?
There's a vertical game that was Great Britain.
Yes?
I have a Pachinko game that looks very similar to that. Is there some relationship?
I'm going to answer your question with a story, okay? I'm a storyteller. About 7 or 8 years ago, when they first had the antique coin machine auctions and the Roy Arrington auctions in Las Vegas, the Japanese sent people over here because the Japanese were beginning to make money then with their automobiles, and they had some disposable income, so they came there. And they came there knowing they had invented the pinball game with the pachinko game and everything else. And they started taking a look at some of this 1890s and turn-of-the-century American stuff, and they said, holy smoke, we didn't invent this stuff at all. The pachinko was a direct steal from some of the American patents and the English games of early 1900s. Pachinko didn't come along till the 1950s.
It's a really well-built game.
Oh, they're marvelous games. They're marvelous games.
I'm surprised that they were selling for like $25 or $50.
I personally find them uninteresting and dull because they have no features.
Well, that's true. But
Okay.
they're really intricate inside.
You want to get in this one, Ed?
Well, I just know that they're very popular in Japan, that you've got pachinko parlors. They used to, they don't anymore because they aren't as interested in them as anymore either, but there were pachinko parlors at every corner.
That was it was used as a gambling device, correct?
In a sense, yeah.
Steve, in the back.
Rich, when will your number one pinball book be available?
Oh, I love you, Steve. I'm 85% written. You know, for a writer, one of the biggest problems is typing. It's fun to write. Writing is about 5% of the work. 95% of the work is the researching. But after you've written it, you just hate to type it, and it's very difficult to find. I can never find anybody who can read my writing. Now, I've sloughed your answer. I think around March or April, I will have the manuscript to the publisher by, the publisher is Coin Slot Books. And if you're interested, there are flyers around here. You can get on. You don't send them any money. Just send them your name and address so you're on the list. But I think about March or April. The publisher will have the manuscript in January. Yes?
One drawback in a lot of things I've seen tutorials on pinballs is that there's a lot of black and white. What part of your book will be in color? And
I'll answer that one.
what testing it?
Obviously, you are not in the printing business. I'm in the advertising business, and a client says, what's it going to cost to make an ad in black and white? $1,000 a page. What about color? $8,200 a page. Why? All it is just color. Well, all it is just color, is different artwork, much expensive camera work and everything else. I got to tell you that if everybody in this room bought 5 books, we couldn't afford 1 page of color in a book. That's the story. There is 8 pages of color. And the color, every bit of color you saw on these slides are going to be in that book. The Ballyhoo cover is going to be in there. No, Ballyhoo's in volume 2. But you're going to see the French Parisian game, and you're going to see quite a few other things in color that I don't have here. Every book will have an 8-page color form on the inside. Plus, I'd say that every book will reproduce something in the order of 20 pinball spec sheets going back to the 1890s and up through whatever time frame we've got. You want to talk about color printing too, Ed?
If you want to know a little bit about publishing, my book is 178 pages long because books are published in sets of 16. And if you look at my book, there's color, but they're all grouped together, they're bunched together, because each set of 16 is that much more money.
Steve?
Yeah.
Our photographs, pinball book, when we photograph the back class, separate photograph the playfield versus a full view machine.
You know, I needed that question because I'll tell you why. I'm doing 10 volumes, and each volume is going to have 100 different pinball games, which means I got to have a picture. I got to have photographs of 1,000 different pinball games. You know, it's easy to get to 100. Yeah, a little tougher to get to 200. I'm at about 485 now. It's damn difficult. And what I'm looking for are back glass, playfield, and then full machine to show the graphics on the side photographs. And if any of you have games that you're proud of, and maybe I don't have them in my 485, do drop me a line. I would like pictures, and I will run a credit line from whoever collection I run it from. But I'm going to shoot to have at least 2. That's playfield and full machine. And wherever there's a back glass, go for 3 photographs in each one. So you can really see the details of the playfield, the back glass, and the whole thing. Because it's a total experience in graphics, as Ed has said. Yes?
Steve, what do you think the pinball game will feature when it's invented the 8th time?
Well, I said 7 times, and I was being a little superficial there because it was really 23 times. But I figured that would take too damn long. No, the game didn't stick until Wiffle came along, and here, you know, I'm sure the people in this room who don't even, have never heard of Wiffle. With Wiffle, it stuck. There are at least 23 inventions. There are all sorts of things that were done in the 20s. There was a back glass electric scoring pinball made in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1907 by the W.S. Reed Company. And I got a hold of a librarian up there, and the lady found an ad for it. You know, it's just great. So a lot of it. But part of your question is, where's pinball going? Isn't it? I'd like to hear what Ed says on that for a moment or two, then I got an idea on that too.
I think that Dick's being conservative in his estimate when he says it's been invented 23 times, because if you read the ads for pinball games, everyone is the newest and the best and the latest.
Yeah.
And if you look at the new games that are on display here, those are new inventions. Each pinball game is a new invention. The direction they're going now, of course, is with computers, computer technology.
Every new game is another invention?
Every new game is another invention. Every new game is new and different. Invention means innovative, and every game is innovative.
I work in industrial advertising, and we get all sorts of high-tech kinds of people in, and they're all very proud of what they do. And I start showing them these bagatelles on the wall, and they said, "What's that?" I said, "That's high-tech." "Oh, don't be silly." I said, "No kidding. I mean, the microprocessor was in pinball games in 1976, and I bet you guys didn't get it till 1980. And they all started looking at each other saying, "He's right, he's right, he's right." In pinball, the first use of a new technology, more often than not, shows up in a pinball game. Now, where's it going from here? Well, we've just gone through the agony of the video game. Now, let's talk about the video game. I can't imagine that a game that was programmed by, you know, you got 50 people in a room doing bit by bit by bit by bit, and then you take 400 hours of their time and pack it into a second, and you let players, when they're playing against a program, you got nowhere to go with it. You're playing against 100 people who have spent months trying to beat you. That's kind of tough. No wonder these things dropped off. No wonder the interest was gone, and it's dead. But Harry Williams said it first, and he said it in 1934, and it's never been said better since. Harry Williams said, the ball is wild. Think about that. The ball is wild. Theoretically, if you're a good pinball player, you can play with one ball for a day. Now, pinball design should be such that the drain isn't too fast. Pinball design should be such that that the scoring is right, that somebody really has a chance to do something. But there's a tremendous achievement in pinball because you're not working against a program. Whatever shows up on that glass, you did. And the ball is wild. And that's why that game is going to live, and that's why that game is going to come back. And when people get back to more individuality and start getting away from all this program stuff, you watch for another boom. Do you see it the same way?
Well, when I published my book in 1979, it was really at a peak of interest for pinball, and it was just at the time that video games were coming out, and video games actually brought a lot of people into arcades, and then they would drift off and play pinball. And I'm not sure, I don't know what the industry figures are, if that was a peak for the appreciation of pinball, for the sale of pinball machines. But then I think there was a lull as video games became more popular, as they captured the public's imagination. And I wrote my book for a general public, not for experts like you are. And you know, I could feel it in the interest in my book, and I could see now that pinball has regenerated, it's rejuvenated, and there's much more interest in pinball again. And I think you see that happening in the history of pinball all the time, that it will have its ups and downs, but it always survives.
We could do this all day long, you know, and answer questions. But, Ed, yeah, couldn't we, though? We're both ham hocks, you know. But we're going to be around, so any of you have any questions or just want to talk about something, just come over and push us on the shoulder. And we want to get Stanley here? Yes, sir. Stanley is the largest operator of pinballs in the country, actually the world, and we should all thank him because he buys machines from the people who make them. Yep.
8 hours and then going home. The play machine business is like show business.
You play.
I mean, if you walk across the street, you'll see these 10, 15 company operators like myself who didn't finish work and go home. They live it. That's why they're there.
Right.
That's why I'm I have a daughter that for 5 years teaching English in the high school, so I can't take it. She's now part of our So going from teaching high school English to public relations in a pinball company answers the question. It's like show business.
Pinball is show business.
You don't leave it. You don't work 8 hours and go home. You live it. And that's why, in my case, my hobby is not playing golf or chasing girls or whatever. It's machines. That's why they go on forever.
Thank you, all of you, and do ask us questions as we're milling around the room.